Good evening, one and all present here. It is indeed pleasure to introduce Dr. Anwar Sadhath, a great intellectual, not only in academics, but also in administration. Dr. Anwar Sadhath is interested in cultural studies, translation studies, literature theory and practice, and so many different areas. I do not know what is not his interest. Everything is his interest. See, apart from conferences, seminars, workshops, lectures, his main contribution is that he has created, developed, organized, motivated scholars, and he has contributed to the growth and development of academia in general. So it is like we have restaurant on wheels, and other things. So I think that he is a library on wheels. Wherever sir goes, it's a library. I can see that there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of information that wherever he goes, he inspires people and instructs. And it is not only that Dr. Anwar Sadhath goes, it is a library that goes. That's so much of tremendous knowledge that he has in almost all his fields. There are many scholars like me who have benefited from Dr. Anwar Sadhath. So I think that I have so many things to say, but I do not know how to do justice to the topic that you have, Dr. Sadiqul Amin has given to me, and I feel really honored, and concomitantly I thank the opportunity, but I know that I have not done justice to the topic. Once Samuel Boswell, in his biography, he writes about Dr. Johnson, saying that Boswell starts with the description that, sir, what is poetry? So Dr. Johnson has once told Boswell that it is easy to say what it is not than to say what it is. Like that, you see that a philosophical kind of a thing. So his areas of interest, I have seen him. Dr. Anwar Sadhath has published, he has done translations, he has translated English poems into Malayalam. He has done a lot of research on cultural studies and Muslim fiction and so many other areas. So one thing is that I'm highly impressed by him. I feel honored to introduce a great person like him, because when you are associated with great persons, you also become great. That is what I think. So thank you very much, Dr. Sadiqul Amin and the team, the academic who's organizing it. Thank you very much. So kind. Welcome, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Nasrullah sir. I now invite Dr. Anwar Sadhath to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shafiq Pasha. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to one and all present in this meeting. I'm very grateful to Dr. Nasrullah Bakhtiyari for his very generous introduction. Thank you, Doctor. You are very kind.
You're welcome, sir.
I'm also grateful to the organizers from my own department, including the principal, vice principal, head of the department, and the coordinator from our side, Dr. Sadhath, and my other colleagues who have directly or indirectly involved in the success of this program. And I would also express my gratitude to the members from AURA, all the office bearers and members from AURA and other collaborating institutions for this opportunity. And I consider it as a privilege to be part of this event, because I've been watching the kind of participation, kind of interactions, that have been taking place all these days in this FDP program. I especially appreciate the consistent efforts put in by Dr. Sadhath Amin. I see him work 24/7 for the success of this particular FDP. He has taken it as a kind of great responsibility, and he's doing wonders. This salutes to you, Dr. Sadhath, for all the work that you are doing. And I'm also equally grateful to all my colleagues who have supported the conduct of this program. My main concern today is to talk about the theoretical standpoint in literary research. In fact, my intention is not to talk elaborately on theories, because you have heard enough about theories, and you have been exposed to various theoretical constructs over the past few sessions. And therefore, instead of talking so much on theories per se, I would like to talk on the methodological side. How can we integrate? How can we employ theoretical constructs in literary research? This is my main concern. I think I can share my screen. Okay. Sadhath, is my screen visible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see your screen, sir.
Right. Okay. So to begin with, literary research and theory, we can very broadly say that literary research and literary theory belongs to the broad realm of humanities. One very defining characteristic quality of humanities is that it accommodates varied, points of view and diverse opinions, different arguments, and multiple, ways of looking at things. So this broad realm of humanities is what facilitates literary research. That is, anyone who is in the field of humanities is not constrained by the kind of disciplinary boundaries, that work in other disciplinary areas like social science and science. The people in humanities are really privileged, because the very field of humanities is not very clearly defined on the one hand, and secondly, that the interdisciplinary possibilities within this realm of humanities is immense, particularly with the intervention of theories. So this is the pretext in which we talk about literary research and literary theory. I would initially tell you that, as all of you know, literary theory has assumed an unprecedented importance in these days, and because of this, literary research has acquired so much of interdisciplinarity in recent times. Okay, so both these are interconnected. Okay? There are plenty of theories on the one hand, and there are opportunities when literary research is crossing the borders. There is no longer, I remember the kind of topics being carried out by scholars in the 1960s and 70s. One of the scholars who pursued PhD under my supervisor, worked on, and he's a very really brilliant scholar and poet and all that. He worked on the aesthetics of metaphor. You cannot see such kind of dissertations today. Every dissertation, probably every second dissertation or every third dissertation that you come across in English departments or from humanities departments, they are interdisciplinary on the one hand, and they are, they are very often extensions of theoretical readings. That is, every work, every second or third work that you come across is a reading of literary work, select literary works from some theoretical perspectives. So it is therefore very clear that literary research is looked at as an integral part of, literary theory is looked at as an integral part of literary research. Today, you cannot think of literary research without thinking about literary theory. This has become like that. And you may probably ask, is theory necessary? That's a big question which the answering of which, varies probably from people to people. There are also people, even when I was a student, there were people, there was a time when theory was, coming to the forefront, and those who knew theory and those who were talking about theory were considered to be a kind of elitist in the departments, and they invited or they attracted so much of attention. And those who did not speak about theory or did not orient themselves in theory were looked down upon. Okay, that's a kind of times in which even I have passed through as a student in those days during the late 1990s. So right from those days, literary theory has become today. Every teacher of literature or every student of literature or every researcher in literature is expected to know literary theory, and therefore whenever there is a YOC examination or an evaluation of a dissertation, there are specific questions on why haven't you integrated any theory in your literary work. In such questions I myself have heard several times, and sometimes the question is that it's about if a theory is used, why have you used this particular, not other theories, right? So this kind of questions are very common, and theoretical standpoint has thus become an unavoidable part of a literary dissertation or a dissertation in English literary studies. So here, certain very basic questions we need to address, particularly related to the methodology of humanities. Okay, in methodology of humanities. One problem in methodology of humanities is that the methodology of humanities is not as crystal clear as the methodology of social science or the methodology of sciences. Of course, it has its own clarity, in the sense that we have not very clearly defined the structure of a dissertation, and it is not common across universities. Now, for example, a dissertation that you see in a university in North India may be different from a dissertation that is being written by a student in South India. And sometimes it may vary from university to university, college to college. So this is this methodological variation. For example, there are universities which insist on scholars to write a separate chapter on review of literature, for example, okay, and separate chapter on theoretical standpoint, okay, right. And there are places, where all these, both theoretical standpoint as well as review of literature, is made part of the introductory chapter. Okay, such things also are there. Sometimes I have also evaluated dissertations where the theoretical chapter is, kind of a standalone chapter, which is somewhat cut off from the rest of the dissertation. There is an elaborate discussion on theory. For example, recently I evaluated, dissertations which deal with theoretical positions like, biopolitics, for example, and trauma theory, for example. Okay, these kind of things. There are dedicated chapters on theory specific. In these chapters, one problem that I have noticed is that these chapters are standalone chapters. They talk only about theory. There is the candidates have not succeeded 100% in integrating these theory chapters with their research topic, right? So considering this methodological, these are some examples of the methodological problem that I have just mentioned. Okay. Anyway, we can come to certain basic premises. One is, we can consider research as a search for sources. Okay, search for sources. Okay, that is, when you get a paper, for peer reviewing. Okay, for example. For me, in my experience of reviewing papers, the first thing that I look to is the bibliography or the works cited part of it, right? If the works cited part of the paper is very elaborate, it has so many works, it will be very impressive for me, okay, because it is an indication that the candidate has searched so many sources, okay, and the works cited are the works literally used in the dissertation, not some places in, they write instead of works cited, they write works consulted, which I don't agree with, because, that's a misleading thing. We do not know which work is, cited, which work is consulted. Anyway, research as a search for, when you consider research as a search for sources, we need to include various types of sources, okay, right? In a literary research, we have primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources, as in any other, research work. Okay. The primary sources for us is the text on which, okay, or the text, the word text is, literally speaking, the word text has come from textiles, and it, I think, literally means a fabric, which is different layers are connected together. You can literally look into that, okay, right? And the word text is very, very broad term. It need not necessarily be a novel or poem or drama or anything like that. It can also be, maybe some other text. For example, you can consider certain theory books as text, okay? You can consider films as text. You can consider performances of plays as text, okay? You can consider YouTube videos, and even, the ubiquitous gadgets and other things that we use on a daily basis can also be considered as text. So keeping in mind that the meaning of text, the broad meaning of text, I would say that one material that is mandatory for every literary research is a primary source, okay? And primary sources are the text that we use, okay? It can vary, of course, okay, right? Secondary sources, as all of you know, secondary sources are the writings on the primary source, okay? Now, there are also problems in this term. In I have seen in many places people consider even theory works as a secondary source, but I don't think it is absolutely right. So secondary sources are, as the word suggests, secondary sources are the works on the primary source. Suppose you are working on Amitav Ghosh's novels, papers published on Amitav Ghosh's novels can be considered secondary. So even an interview by Amitav Ghosh on his writing can also be considered as a secondary source. But not an essay written by Roland Barthes on, death of the author, okay? That cannot be considered. You may be using that in this, but that cannot be a secondary source. That is a third type of source, and which we call tertiary sources. So we can say that theoretical works or literary theory as used in literary research, unless it is used as a primary text, okay, it can be considered as a tertiary source, okay, right? And it is always welcome to use any kind of sources, okay? The more the sources, the merrier, the examiner be, right? The examiners will become happier if you use, because in research, one of the foremost meaning of research is searching for sources, okay? And of course there are other meanings, like joining the ongoing conversation, considering the existing works on the topic that you have chosen, or the books that you have chosen, and connecting your work with the already existing studies on the topic that you have chosen. All those things are there, but primarily we have to think of this as a search for sources, okay? So it is categorically clear that theoretical writings are tertiary sources, third sources, okay, right? But there are also other tertiary sources. Theory alone is not a tertiary source, okay? For example, when you're working on Indian writing in English, most of the Indian novels, as all of you would agree, are very closely knit with the history of the country. To use a phrase used by Salman Rushdie in Midnight Children, they are handcuffed to the history of the country. Right? Now, we cannot consider Indian. We cannot look at Indian writing, Indian fiction in English, without any reference to India's history, without any reference. Probably there may be some novels which are completely disconnected because of this handcuffed nature of history and fiction, India's culture, tradition, and literary fiction. Probably the real characters in history very, very often walk through the streets of fictional realms, and we have Mahatma coming in, waiting for Mahatma by Mahatma in R.K. Narayan's novels, and we have very direct references to Indira Gandhi in Rohinton Mysteries novels, and things like that, to mention many things. Okay, there are very direct work. That is possible in India. Probably that is not the case in other countries. When we read American literature and British literature, I have never come across such frequency with which the real is intertwining with the fictional. Okay, right? So when you study on such works, probably you may have to refer to, you may have to, shall we say, quote, historical writings, other non-fictional writings. For example, people who are working on any kind of political developments in India, be it communal violence, be it political developments like emergency and elections and other kind of events in India. All these things have got two kind of representation. One is the fictional representation which you see in the novels, and also there are non-fictional representations, writings by journalists on the one hand, writings by historians, historical treatises, and you can also see the same issue being addressed by a novel as well as a center page article in a newspaper in India. Okay, right? Therefore, while working on certain texts, sometimes you may be forced to look into other tertiary sources. That is also welcome to be included. Okay, right? But of course, for students of literature, I think it will be easier for us to integrate anything that falls under the broad rubric of broad canvas of humanities. Otherwise, we may have to unnecessarily give justifications. Okay? So anything philosophical, anything historical, anything journalistic, because anything that comes with the involvement of the subjectivities of the people who have produced it, can be considered part of humanities, and therefore they can be used. And in that sense, all those works are can be treated as almost equal also, in my opinion. So one more thing I wanted to tell you, I have mentioned this, that is, there are also possibilities of considering theory as a primary text. Okay, you can conduct a full-length study of. Now, one of my friends worked on the works of Edward Said. Okay, right? One of is working in a university. He has worked on Edward Said. This primary texts are the writings of Edward Said. Okay, Edward Said. Edward Said is a post-colonial critic. He's not a literary writer. In English literature, you can pursue such kind of researches also. You can take 3 or 4 works by Foucault, or 3 or 4 works by Benjamin or Althusser or Derrida or any kind of writers, and you can make a critical analysis, or you can make a study of a certain issue that is being addressed by these theoretical works. Such possibility also is there. In such cases, the theory becomes the primary source, and all writings on those theory becomes the secondary sources, and other general theory becomes general theories, and other historical and other writings turn out to be the tertiary sources. I hope I'm clear. I would also want to tell you that you can raise your hand, or you can interfere at any point of time. You can interfere in the presentation. So I'm not so ambitious also. I'm not, feeling that I'll be able to deliver so much in this 1 hour. It's not, we cannot play much magic, therefore, whatever is possible, I try to tell you within this course. But if you are feeling like asking a question which cannot wait till the end of my presentation, you can ask that. Okay, that's okay for me. And coming to the theoretical standpoint, every literary work which is using literary theory can possibly have a theoretical standpoint. Literally speaking, theoretical standpoint is the the pedestal on which the perspectival pedestal on which the researcher stands. Okay, right? That is, you need to look at somewhere. You need to stand somewhere firmly to look at literary works. For it is something very similar to looking at a building, or looking at a, any kind of thing. For example, the way in which you look at your own college or your own university. Okay, see, if you stand in front of the college or university, the kind of perspective that you get may be different from the kind of perspective that you get when you look at from the sideways, from the back side, or from inside, or anything like that. Okay. So that is a very literal meaning of perspective. Likewise, your basic objective is looking at text. Okay, when you want to look at text, you need to stand somewhere very firmly. Okay, right? So you have to be very clear from which angle you want to look at this. That is where theoretical standpoint comes into play. You cannot look at multiple angles at the same time. That is one of the fallacies of using theories. Okay, you cannot be at the same time looking at you have selected 10 novels from one particular literature, post-colonial writing, or maybe from new writings in English or Indian literature in English. And you cannot be at the same time applying a little bit of feminism, little bit of Marxism, little bit of post-structuralism, little bit of post-colonialism, a little bit of trauma theory, a little bit of, shall we say, the assumptions behind comparative literature and things like that. This cannot make the theoretical standpoint possible. Okay, you cannot have multiple vantage points, to look at the same books. Okay, so this will, of course, it may be, I don't know whether it may be possible. If your work is so elaborate, it may be possible, but to a normal researcher, it is quite unlikely, quite difficult, to have multiple vantage points to look at the same books. Okay, but that does not mean that you cannot have related perspectives. For example, when you work on when you use certain terms like post-colonial, okay, right? Sometimes researchers use broad terms like post-colonial. Now, there are also possibilities where you use a specific term. For example, you use colonial, shall we say, remnants of the colonialism. Remnants means what remains after colonialism. Okay, that is a very specific kind of thing. When you think of, for example, when you think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's novels set in Nigeria, there is a possibility that the novel gives us so much about what remains after the colonial encounter. Particularly, there are very detailed references to Christianity, the way in which Christianity has taken, shall we say, headways into the Nigerian culture, demolishing some of the existing religious structures, like their traditional religions and things like such kind of assumptions you will get. But when you use very broad terms like post-colonialism, you may be talking about several aspects of post-colonial encounter. Okay, such things are okay. If you are within the boundary of a theoretical premise, it is perfectly all right. Okay, so theoretical standpoint, I hope you have understood the meaning of theoretical standpoint. Theoretical standpoint is the the perspectival pedestal from which the researcher is standing and looking at the work. Okay, from which angle are you looking at the text that you have chosen? Okay, so this theoretical standpoint is usually incorporated in the title of the thesis, and it will reflect in the thesis statement, and it will be elaborated in the introductory chapter to tell you the minimum. Okay, right? There is also a possibility that you can, in addition to the introduction, you can write an exclusive chapter where you explain your theoretical standpoint. Okay, so we can very vaguely speaking, you can say that theoretical standpoint forms a part of forms the backdrop of the study. Okay, that is the backdrop of the study, right? So there is a specific point from which you look at the text. Okay, this is your approach to the text. This is your way of looking at the text, and it is theoretical standpoint also consists of the key assumptions that inform your study. The key assumptions that inform your study. There are certain conceptual realms. Okay, there are conceptual understanding of certain things. You may have certain, this even these understandings that we call conceptual realm may be something which is which may appear to be prejudiced for another person. Of course, even this conceptual realm that you talk about need to be justified. Okay, when you say that you are looking at from this particular perspective, you have to very clearly say why this perspective. Okay, what made you? Okay, that you have to talk about. Okay, this perspective you have to talk about. There is a backdrop of the study. This backdrop of the study also includes other factors. For example, when there is a study on the way in which secularism has worked in India, secularism, the history of secularism in India, you may probably have to refer to the history of communal clashes and the kind of disturbances on the one hand, and also the efforts to integrate communities, the effort to put them together right throughout history in the pre-independence as well as post-independence period. That you may have to talk about, okay, right? And the next thing is that very often theoretical standpoint is formed with reference to a well-established theory or a collection of theories related to each other, okay, not completely unrelated to each other. And sometimes it may be based on an individual theoretical work. For example, you are attempting to make an Orientalist reading of a particular text or a particular film or anything. Probably you may be using only one book, as a theoretical, as a source of theoretical standpoint, only one book. But of course, you may be adding secondary sources on the theoretical works. For example, Edward says Orientalism, okay, right? Maybe the work that you rely on, okay, right? Many a time when people pursue MPhil dissertations, I often ask them to take smaller projects, okay, smaller projects in the sense that they have to take only consider only one book as a theoretical standpoint. They can rely on, for example, they can rely on Bill Ashcroft and others book, The Empire Writes Back, or even Homike Baba's book, or anybody's book, okay. So that is very easy to do, kind of a thing, okay. And another thing is that critical terms from a particular school of particular terms from a particular school of theory, like the concept of hybridity in postcolonialism, okay, in interpreting a text. Okay, for example, although this concept is very often talked about in postcolonialism, it is also talked about in cultural studies. Okay, therefore you can take assumptions both from cultural studies as well as postcolonialism because they are related to each other. That is okay, right? And you can also take concepts and terms associated with the literary movements and certain periodizing terms like modernism, postmodernism, and things like that. Okay. So I would tell you some examples, some very elementary examples of how theory is being used in literary research. There are a possibility for a person to use Foucault's assumptions on biopolitics on a study on intersex lives that's presented in select novels. Okay, suppose you want to talk about intersex people presented in diverse novels. Okay, there is a kind of issue of biopolitics, how government and the system of governmentality is interfering with people, interfering with people's bodies, and interfering with people's health. Maybe an interesting topic. So that is an example of how theory is assumed. Okay, here in this kind of a study, the focus is on Foucault's assumptions. Okay, you cannot, even in the very title itself, you may be mentioning Foucault. Therefore, you rely only on Foucault for your theoretical standpoint. And suppose you take topics like employing ideas relating to deconstruction. Okay, employing ideas related to deconstruction. Sometimes you can use that to uncover. For example, Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Okay, Heart of Darkness is a very popular novel, and you can apply certain concepts relating to deconstruction in understanding Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So likewise, Umberto Eco's use of the postmodern notion of intertextuality in his very celebrated essay Casablanca, Cult Movies and Intertextual Collage, is a typical example of how a term associated with postmodernity, an idea associated with postmodernism, is made use of in applying. Okay, even Umberto Eco's study of Casablanca can be used as a tertiary source, in understanding certain other things, because he comes out with a lot of assumptions, interesting assumptions about how intertextuality works. In fact, even I presented a paper in a seminar some years back in a college in Kerala about how intertextuality works in certain Malayalam films related to communal harmony, so I have used this particular essay, Casablanca, cult movies and intertextual collage, as a theoretical source. Okay, that also is possible. So examining novels of Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie, as I just mentioned, using Bakhtin's idea of polyphony and dialogy. This is actually one topic, carried out by one of my scholars who got the degree awarded last year. So, and this was an issue that he has dealt with. So here, the novels of one particular writer is approached from Mikhail Bakhtin's idea of polyphony, dialogism, and related concepts, right? So that is also possible. These are examples, okay? And you can also think of a new historicist reading of Shakespeare's plays, select plays, okay? So these are typical examples of some examples. So now I try to include, diverse examples. But of course, as anyone in the field of literature, in the field of literary research would know that if you walk through the English dissertation section of any library, you will, come across a lot of topics in which, even in the very title itself, there is a mention of the use of literary theory. And probably in one of my searches, for a lecture in a refresher course, I found that numerous dissertations, if you just give a search called a feminist in Shotganga, you will come across hundreds of dissertations, with the title, with the feminist as a word in the very title. That means many people have looked at literary works from a feminist perspective. Okay? So this is one thing that, okay, right? I wanted to give you in the form of examples, okay? So now, going on to theoretical approaches, we can say that literary interpretations often reflect a particular institutional, cultural, and historical background, okay, right? So how is literature? On the one hand, you can say that literary interpretations carried out in a particular region, for example, in a particular university, for example, okay, right, may have certain tendencies, okay, and in certain cultures there may be ways in which literature is, in certain historical contexts it may have, okay. So interpretations vary from place to place, okay, right? Even that you can understand if you look into the topics selected by people in different universities, you can understand, okay. So interpretations are not carried out in the same way everywhere. It has its bearing, probably cultural and other kind of bearing can be found in literary interpretations, right? Scholarly approaches, it is not approaches to literary texts differ in their theoretical foundations also, okay, right? So if you search for articles on a particular writer, when you start searching for secondary sources on the author that you have chosen, you can very clearly say that all these essays are written from different theoretical foundations. That is perfectly all right, because such multiplicity of, possibility of using multiplicity of vantage points in approaching texts is, made possible by our very domain called humanities and literary studies. Therefore, it is okay to find such things, okay. And in literary theoretical approaches, if you go back to the old age of literary criticism, in fact, we have first started literary criticism, later on, came to literary theory. For example, all those who have studied MA English maybe about 5 to 10 years back would have studied, a paper on literary criticism where you have studied, Philip Sidney and, preface to lyrical ballads and Johnson's ideas on metaphysical poets and blah, 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 all those kind of things you might have heard of. And sometimes, from such kind of an era of literary studies, we have come to the age of literary theory, okay. So now, but the approaches are almost the same. You can say that, you can very broadly speaking, you can say that the theoretical approaches may be focusing on text on the one hand. Okay, sometimes most studies, there may be studies that focus on text, for example, text-oriented approaches. You can very broadly categorize the approaches to literature into four. Okay, this is a very old kind of division, not a very modern kind of a division. Very traditionally speaking, right from the time of literary criticism, we have been dividing it like that. Your approach may be text-centered. Your approach may be author-oriented. Your approach may be, focused on reader's point of view, and your study may be focusing on context. Okay, on the context. Okay, so if your study is text-oriented, your focus will be on formal or textual, kind of matters related to your work. And if it is author-oriented approach, your focus will be on connecting the biography of the author with the text that you are working on. Okay. You try to connect the biography of the author with the text that you have chosen. You can say that the failure of, as Roland Barthes tells in that very famous essay that the author, the failure of Mallarmé is, characters probably is the failure of Mallarmé himself, or the madness. When you talk about the madness, of certain very famous Renaissance painters, sometimes you may also be talking about their works as well as their person simultaneously. So there may be author-oriented approach, and sometimes the focus is on the reader. How a particular work is impacting a reader. That can be the, and probably among all these, the most popular and widely used approach is, the context-oriented approach. Okay. Context-oriented approach, where the focus is on social histories, focuses on history, society, political background, sometimes the genre in which the books that you have chosen belong, and sometimes the nationality of the writer you have chosen, sometimes the gender, and the nation where your work is set, gender, and so on. Okay, such kind of things. So these are very traditional way of looking. Of course, you may find overlaps in all this. For example, a text-oriented approach may also be used for a context-oriented study. For example, you can use new historicism in a text-oriented approach. For example, if you want to analyze the textuality of a historical book, or the historicity of a literary text, sometimes you may be making a very close critical reading of the text, where your focus is only on the text and you don't look outside. Okay, such kind of study can be carried out using new historicism. Of course, you can also make a study on new historicism, where you take your shall we say interpretation outside the text into the context. For example, while interpreting a work of Shakespeare, you may also be thinking about the circumstances in which Shakespeare lived, or you may be referring to certain historical references, cross references that you find elsewhere. Okay, the references in his book, you may find elsewhere in historical text, or you may find a problem in the way in which he is integrating a source text into his play. Such kind of overlapping, maybe it is not very strict watertight compartments that you have to keep in mind. Okay, so these are the four popular approaches that you can find. Okay, so to talk about text-oriented approaches, you can say that for example, stylistics, Russian formalism, structuralism, semiotics, deconstruction, and even new distortion that I just told you. These theories, can be used, of course, okay, but not limited to. Even earlier approaches like, philology, rhetoric, and all those kind of things can also be considered as, as a critical approach in which the text is the center point. Okay, text is central point. Now, in post-structuralism, there is a point in post-structuralism where they talk about the text, in a very elaborate manner, or to the extent of saying that there is nothing outside the text. Of course, that's a statement which needs so much of clarification. So I just casually mentioned that because there's no time to go into such kind of domains, which will take us a long time to complete. Anyway, these are some of the theoretical, positions, okay, theories that are being made use of in text-oriented. Now, some issues, addressed in this kind of works include textual and narrative elements. Sometimes there is a reference to structure, there is a discussion of point of view, there is a discussion of plot, the patterns of plot, sometimes the use of rhetorical figures, the use of words, for example. You can, for example, if you're doing stylistics, you can make a full-length study about the use of epithets or adjectives in a novel or something like that. Okay, and syntax, a meter, all those kind of, if it is poetry, of course. And this study can also be dealing with issues like textual composition, the selection of themes, organization of patterns, organization of the material, okay, the fictional material or any other material. And sometimes it may also be explication of the formal and structural patterns. For example, structuralism is very much interested in delineating the patterns or the threads running to, literally speaking, I have told you that the origin, this, if you check the etymology of the word text, you will reach a textile, okay, right? Such kind of structural patterns, inquiries in search of understanding structural patterns may be there. Sometimes even things like defamiliarization, practiced by Russian formalist critics like Viktor Shklovsky, and alienation effect, practiced by dramatists like Brecht, and metafiction, it's a postmodern, shall we say, critical methodology followed by postmodern critics. Okay, fiction, metafiction, alienation effect, as I told you, character typology. I think it is another Russian critic, I forgot his name, who was talking about, instead of talking about all characters, he's talking about putting the characters in different types, okay, right? Even the use of even references to study of the patterns of myths, even the study of archetypes, can be considered archetypal criticism. There are studies about the poems of Blake, using archetypal criticism and many other things. These things can be considered as text-oriented approaches. Okay, part of text-oriented. These are the practices. These are the kind of things people do in text-centered text-oriented approaches. Okay, right here, structuralists and post-structuralists consider text as a system of science. Okay, a semiotic study can also be conducted. A very famous book by Roland Barthes called Mythologies is a typical example of how different things are approached using the concept of structuralism. So this also can be considered as text-oriented approach. In author-centered approach, you have biographical and autobiographical studies. Okay, autobiographical studies are an emerging area. Even now, new studies are coming up. Of course, psychoanalysis may be there, where in which you try to drag in the psychology of the writer into discussion of the book. Phenomenological approach. Okay, where you talk about reconstructing the author's spirit through the work. So all these things can be considered as author-centered. Of course, these, the critical approaches that I'm mentioning are not all inclusive. I'm just giving you a few examples. So it's not complete. This is, but this can be part of that. Of course, as I told you in the beginning, there may be overlapping also, and the link between literary text and the biography of the author is one thing that can be done here. Mythologizing canonical authors. Okay, for example, some writers become much more important than their books. Because of the kind of shall we say canonical value being attached to them. And reconstructing, of course, as I told you, psychoanalysis beyond the author, analysis of characters, connecting the characters with the author and things like that. Okay. So for example, when you talk about the Oedipus complex in a character, sometimes you may extend this Oedipus complex to the writer as well. Okay, sometimes. So such kind of studies may be considered. And in reader-centered approach, the two main theories in reader-centered approach are reception theory and reader response theory. Here, the focus is on, but not limited to, effect on the text, effect of a text on the recipient, readers explore expectations from a text, reading individuals' role in interpretation of the text, and even diachronic analysis of the reception of a text. For example, a text which has completed so many years of its existence. Suppose you talk about Shakespeare's works, which have most of which have crossed 400 years. Over the years, there's a particular series of book called Critical Tradition. Okay, Shakespeare, the Critical Tradition series. I remember using, depending on this work when I was a student. In Critical Tradition, one advantage is that the Critical Tradition books will give us the earliest criticism to the latest available criticism, till the time of the publication of that book. In that case, suppose you want to understand diachronically understand the way in which Shakespeare's Hamlet or Othello or Macbeth or King Lear was studied or received by people in different ages, you will get a diachronic analysis. Even such kind of an analysis can make a literary research. Okay? And there are also occasions to be a little bit casual. Text is considered as a stimulus that elicits different responses from different readers. That's a very generalized kind of an approach. Okay, right? You can very generally say that every text acts like a stimulus that elicits different kind of responses from different readers. This is and coming to context-centered approaches. In context-centered approaches, as I told you, context-centered approaches being much more widely used than other approaches, in my understanding. Okay, in my understanding of literary research, because in my exposure to the kind of topics that I have seen, Marxist literary theories, new historicism, cultural studies, you can see the overlapping of new historicism here as well as in the text-centered criticism. Cultural studies, of course, is probably the most widely used critical, theoretical standpoint in literary research today. And gender studies, of course, and feminisms, I used very deliberately. I have used feminisms because we have different type of feminism. We have ecofeminism, we have radical feminism, we have socio-feminism, we have many other types of feminism, socio-feminism, and all that. So, and of course, post-colonialism. All these theories are context-oriented theories, and the application of which will amount to discussing a text with reference to its context. You cannot, there you primarily believe that the text is not a self-contained entity. A text cannot be considered as an independent work of art without any connection whatsoever with the context in which it is produced. Okay, right? And placing the text within the larger context like social movements, history, social and political background, a literary genre, nationality, gender, and all those kind of things can be considered as part of a text-centered approach. Okay, all these are issues addressed in text-centered approach. And of course, very generally speaking, expressions of social, economic, and political factors that contribute to a particular, shall we say, plot being examined. Or, for example, when you talk about the fictional locales in different novels, for example, when you talk about the development of the place called Macondo in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's very famous novel, 100 Years of Solitude. Now you can see that this banana kind of plantation and the resultant catastrophe there, in which about 3,000 people who agitated against the banana plantation being killed, and all those kind of incidents. Sometimes you may be able to relate those incidents to certain real incidents in the history of Colombia, and therefore that such expressions can be arguably not innocent, not completely innocent. It cannot be considered as a kind of pure fiction. Rather, it is related to real incidents. Such kind of connections can be made. You can also say that Macondo is a kind of representation of Colombia as a whole. Okay, right? Or the places that is being familiar to him. Of course, he uses fantastic elements like magic realism to tell the story. But even while using this fantastic elements like magic realism in telling the story, he's very consciously integrating, of course, only for a critic, only for a close reader, it will be understandable. certain things that you want to convey to the society, that is just not a mere fiction, rather it is a critique of his own place, the locale called Macondo, which may stand for any place that he wanted to talk about. Okay, that is the way in which the context-centered approaches work. Okay, now when you again, to give you examples of Indian writing in English, most of the Indian novels are to be contextualized. Okay, are to be contextualized. So, for example, when you very closely read Khushwant Singh's Delhi, you not only get a history of Delhi, and parallelly alongside the history of Delhi, alongside the history of the development of Delhi, with reference to its ancient days, to the development of the modern New Delhi, where the planners even made sure that the trees that they planted on either side of the road, the very wide road, is very slow growing, and they had a vision of 200 years ahead of them when they planned all this. This kind of statements, in such kind of a novel, will make you understand that this is a history of Delhi. But at the same time, you can say that as a writer belonging to the Sikh community, you can say that this novel also is indirectly a history of Sikhism, which starts from a very early point in India history and culminates with the anti-Sikh riots in Delhi. Okay, so that can also be read. So without any reference, if you try to read Khushwant Singh's Delhi without any references to its background, it may be it may be wrong to read like that, because most of the Indian writings, as I told you in the beginning, cannot be completely cut off from their background. They are very closely knit with, they are handcuffed with the history of the country and the communities, that they are talking about. Okay, right? Now you can say that the writer has tried to prioritize his own community, even while presenting the history of, the cosmopolitan city of Delhi. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to tell you for this. Okay, anyway, coming back to the theoretical backdrop of the study, I hope I am not, it is 7:30 already, okay, right? Theoretical backdrop of the study. Coming back to theoretical backdrop of the study, chapter on theoretical backdrop of the study in a particular dissertation, coming back to the basics. One of the basic, challenge is identifying the central theoretical concern of your study. Okay, so is it Orientalist stereotyping? Is it racial kind of oppression? Is it power relations? Is it gender inequality? And so on and so forth. You have innumerable number of theoretical concern. What exactly is the theoretical concern that you are addressing? Okay, once you identify this theoretical concern, for example, you want to work on a collection of novels by writers belonging to sidelined classes or marginalized classes. Okay, now when you talk about sidelined and marginalized classes, sometimes there are possibilities that you may talk about very general terms like oppression, sidelining, marginalization, things like that. Sometimes you may also think about the inner layers of power relations working within the communities represented. For example, there are very clear representations of the power structure working within tribal communities in the stories and novellas of Mahashita Devi. Okay, right? And the same is true about the minority representations in Indian fiction, where you can very clearly see minorities within minorities, or communities within minorities, or subsections running within a community. Sometimes you may also find subcultures, different kind of subcultures. Okay, people based on their interests. For example, a dance related subculture or a music related subculture, or many things like that. Such kind of things you can find out. So the first challenge is identifying the central theoretical concern that disturbs your study. Okay, and the second thing is that linking the theoretical concern to the research question or the central thesis or the thesis statement that you have. So you cannot, if you make it, if you do not make it part of your research question, it will be difficult for you to integrate into the mainframe of your work. And third thing is that consolidating ideas on, all these things should come in the theoretical backdrop of your study. Consolidating the theoretical ideas on the areas of concern addressed by the study, ideas from diverse theoreticians you can consolidate, for example, belonging to the same idea. For example, your focus is on imagine your focus is on trauma theory. Okay, the trauma experienced by characters in a series of works that you have chosen, primary text. So when you are trying to formulate a theoretical backdrop, you may have to refer to so many books written on trauma theory, in which these people talk about such kind of key issues in trauma theory, like witnessing, okay, right? And sometimes many other issues. I don't remember many of these terms. Such things you have to identify, for which you may have to read a lot of theoretical works and consolidating them. Okay, the ideas that you want, ideas that are related to your theoretical concern, need to be compiled. Okay, that alone need to be compiled. And another thing is that the pattern of organization. Sometimes you can arrange your theoretical backdrop in the form of based on ideas. It can be arranged chronologically. It can be arranged in many, but you must have a very clear idea about in what order are you arranging the theoretical backdrop. Okay, are you talking first about this, next about this, and things like that. Okay, that is the thing. And theoretical backdrop, using theory in course chapters. We talk about theory when you write a dissertation. You talk about theory in two places. One is you talk about theory in the introductory part of your thesis, where the theoretical backdrop is being present. Sometimes it is presented as a separate chapter. Sometimes it is presented as part of the introductory chapter. Okay, right? So again, I'm coming back to when you use theory in core chapters, you have to remember that whatever theoretical premises that you have taken in the beginning of your thesis need to be spread out in the core chapters also. Okay, what I mean by core chapters is the chapters that come in between introduction and conclusion. Okay, these are the core chapters. The core chapters are the chapters that deal with your primary text. Okay, sometimes if you have a chapter on theory, that cannot be considered as a core chapter. Rather, it is a kind of introductory or background chapter. Okay, core chapters are the chapters where you directly deal with your primary text. Okay, this term is something that I use for my students. Sometimes it may not suit your requirements, and you can think of this. Okay, and second thing is that here, when you use theory in core chapters, keep in mind that we integrate theory in our body paragraphs. Okay, right? The structure of an academic paragraph is such that every academic paragraph requires a topic sentence. Okay, it may be talking about one particular issue, and this issue need to be elaborated. Okay, elaboration. Okay, and there needs to be evidence for this claim from primary sources. Okay, you can reinforce your evidence by giving a secondary kind of quote. Okay, here at the same paragraph, in the same paragraph, you can also bring in an idea from a tertiary material, from a theory, which will enhance the understanding of this topic sentence which you have mentioned in this paragraph. Okay, so it is very clear that when you apply theory in the core chapters, you are making it, integrating it in the analysis of the text that you have chosen, in presenting the premises of your thesis. So it has to be integrated as a tertiary source. Okay, primary, secondary, tertiary, as a third type of source. So it has to be present in that order only. And of course, there are fallacies in the sense that sometimes there may be the problems in using theory is that sometimes there may be an elaborate discussion on theory in the beginning of the thesis, but the candidate may fail to integrate it into discussion of chapters. Such cases it may fail. But I tell you that 100% of integration is not possible, because theory is a subject which is completely different from the primary text that you have chosen. Okay. Theory is a subject 100% different from your primary text, because your works are not referred to in the theory works. Okay, very accidentally, if at all some references are made, but very unlikely to find any direct references to the primary text that you have chosen. Okay, it's very unlikely. Okay, therefore, the main challenge or main fallacy is that leaving out the theoretical part in core chapters is a fallacy which you may have to take care of. Okay, and sustaining the theoretical premises from the beginning of your thesis to the end of the thesis is the most challenging thing. Okay, so you have to mention, or have to also mention in all the core chapters, in the opening paragraph itself, introductory paragraph itself, you have to give hints about how you are going to integrate theoretical premises. Okay, so that is integrating theory into the academic paragraph is what I have talked about. Okay, that is all from my part. Thank you very much.